An Introduction to the Human Body, Chapter 1. The Human Body and Homeostasis. Humans have many ways to maintain homeostasis, the state of relative stability of the body's internal environment. Disruptions to homeostasis often set in motion corrective cycles called feedback systems that help restore the conditions needed for health and life. Our fascinating journey through the human body begins with an overview of the meaning of anatomy and physiology, followed by a discussion of the organization of the human body and the properties that it shares with all living things. Next, you will discover how the body regulates its own internal environment. This unceasing process called homeostasis is a major theme in every chapter of this book. Finally, we introduce the basic vocabulary that will help you speak about the body in a way that is understood by scientists and healthcare professionals alike. Anatomy and physiology defined. Define anatomy and physiology and name several subspecialties of the science. Two branches of science, anatomy and physiology, provide the foundation for understanding the body's parts and functions. Anatomy is the science of body structures and the relationship among them. It was first studied by dissection, the careful cutting apart of body structures to study their relationship. Today, a variety of imaging techniques also contribute to the advancement of anatomical knowledge. Whereas anatomy deals with structures of the body, physiology is the science of body functions, how the body parts work. Because structure and function are so closely related, you will learn about the human body by studying its anatomy and physiology together. The structure of a part of the body allows performance of certain functions. For example, the bones of the skull join tightly to form a rigid case that protects the brain. The bones of the fingers are more loosely joined to allow a variety of movements. The walls of the air sacs and the lungs are very thin, permitting rapid movement of inhaled oxygen into the blood. The lining of the urinary bladder is much thicker to prevent the escape of urine into the pelvic cavity, yet its construction allows for considerable stretching as the urinary bladder fills with urine. Levels of structural organization. Describe the levels of structural organization that make up the human body. List the 11 systems of the human body, representative organs present in each, and their general function. The levels of organization of a language, letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, and so on, can be compared to the levels of organization of the human body. Your exploration of the human body will extend from atoms and molecules to the whole person. From the smallest to the largest, 6 levels of organization will help you understand anatomy and physiology. The chemical, cellular, tissue, organ, system, and organismal levels of organization. Chemical level. This very basic level can be compared to the letters of the alphabet and include atoms, the smallest unit of matter that participate in chemical reactions in molecules, 2 or more atoms joined together. Certain atoms, such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and sulfur, are essential for maintaining life. 2 familiar molecules found in the body are deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, the genetic material passed from one generation to the next, and glucose, commonly known as blood sugar. Chapter 2 and 25 focus on the chemical level of organization. Cellular level. Molecules combine to form cells, the basic structural and functional units of an organism. Just as words are the smallest elements of language that make sense, cells are the smallest living units in the human body. Among the many kinds of cells in your body are muscles, nerve cells, epithelial cells, the cellular level of organization is the focus of Chapter 3. Tissue level. Tissues are groups of cells and the materials surrounding them that work together to perform a particular function. Similar to the way words are put together to form sentences, there are just 4 basic types of tissue in your body: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. Chapter 4 describes the tissue levels of organization and next we show a figure. By now, you have an idea of what I'm up to. In returning to school, I realized that there are not a lot of audiobooks out there for anatomy and physiology, and textbooks in general. So, as a service, I decided to read this to you. Now, I'm going to pause in several spaces. I'm going to get a drink of water right now. And the reason I'm pausing here is because the book I'm reading out of has charts and pictures, which I'm not going to get into. But if you want to follow this book, I'm reading from the Principles of Anatomy and Physiology. It's the 12th edition. Tortora and Derrickson. So I'm not going to edit. I'm going to try to breeze right through it. And when I get to a figure, I'm probably going to stop. You might see a stumble there. Because like I said, I'm not going to show you the figures. This book is available in digital version. You can get it online from Wiley's, I believe. Wiley's Plus. So to continue, the organ level is the 4th level. Thus far, we've covered the chemical level, the cellular level, the tissue level. Now, number 4 is the organ level. At this level, different types of tissue are joined together, similar to the relationship between sentences and paragraphs. Organs are structures that are composed of 2 or more different types of tissues. They have specific functions and usually have recognizable shapes. Examples of organs are the stomach, skin, bones, heart, liver, lungs, and brain. The stomach's outer covering is a serous membrane, a layer of epithelial tissue and connective tissue that reduces friction when the stomach moves and rubs against other organs. Underneath are smooth muscle tissue layers which contract to churn and mix food, then push it into the next digestive organ. The small intestine, the innermost lining, is an epithelial tissue layer that produces fluid and chemicals responsible for digestion in the stomach. Number 5, system level. A system, or chapter in our analogy, consists of related organs, paragraphs with a common function. An example of the system level, also called the organ system level, is the digestive system, which breaks down and absorbs food. Its organs include the mouth, salivary glands, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Sometimes an organ is part of more than one system. The pancreas, for example, is part of both the digestive system and the hormone-producing endocrine system. Number 6, organismal level. An organism, any living individual, can be compared to a book in our analogy. All the parts of the human body functioning together constitute the total organism. In the chapter that follows, you will study the anatomy and physiology of the body systems. You will also discover that all body systems influence one another. As you study each of the body systems in more detail, you will discover how they work together to maintain health, provide protection from disease, and allow for reproduction of the human species. The clinical connection Non-invasive diagnostic techniques. Healthcare professionals and students of anatomy and physiology commonly use several non-invasive diagnostic techniques to assess certain aspects of body structure and function. In inspection, the examiner observes the body for any changes that deviate from normal. Following this, one or more additional techniques may be employed. In palpation, gently touching, the examiner feels body surfaces with the hands. An example is palpating the abdomen to detect enlarged or tender internal organs or abnormal masses. In auscultation, from the word auscult or listen, the examiner listens to the body sounds to evaluate the functioning of certain organs, often using a stethoscope to amplify the sounds. An example of auscultation of the lungs during breathing to check for crackling sounds associated with abnormal fluid accumulation. In percussion, the examiner taps on the body surface with the fingertip and listens to the resulting echo. For example, percussion may reveal the abnormal presence of fluid in the lungs or air in the intestines. It may also provide information about the size, consistency, and position of an underlying structure. Now, I had a stumble there with the word auscultation. That is spelled A-U-S-C-U-L-T-A-T-I-O-N. Phonetically, it is spelled A-W-S-K-U-L-T-A-S-H-U-N. Auscult, auscultation. Characteristics of the living human organism. Define the important life processes of the human body. Define homeostasis and explain its relationship to interstitial fluid. Basic life processes. Certain processes distinguish organisms or living things from non-living things. Following are the 6 most important life processes of the human body. Metabolism is the sum of all chemical processes that occur in the body. One phase of metabolism is catabolism, from the word catabol, throwing down, ism, a condition, the breakdown of complex chemical substances into simpler components. The other phase of metabolism is anabolism, anabol, raising up, the building up of complex chemical substances from similar simple components. For example, digestive processes catabolize or split proteins in food into amino acids. These amino acids are then used to anabolize, to build new proteins that make up body structures such as muscles and bones. Responsiveness is the body's ability to detect and respond to changes. For example, a decrease in body temperature represents a change in the internal environment within the body, and turning your head towards the sound of squeaking brakes is a response to the change in external environment outside the body. I'm going to repeat that. Responsiveness is the body's ability to detect and respond to changes. For example, a decrease in the body temperature represents a change in the internal environment within the body, and turning your head towards the sound of squealing brakes is a response to change in external environment outside the body. Different cells in the body respond to environmental changes in characteristic ways. Nerve cells respond by generating electrical signals known as nerve impulses, action potentials. Muscle cells respond by contracting, which generates forces to move the body parts. Movement. Movement includes motion of the whole body. individual organs, single cells, and even tiny structures inside the cells. For example, coordinated action of leg muscles moves your whole body from one place to another when you walk or run. After you eat a meal that contains fats, your gallbladder contracts and squirts bile into the gastrointestinal tract to aid in the digestion of fats. When a body tissue is damaged or infected, certain white blood cells move from the blood into the affected tissue to help clean up and repair the area. Inside, the cell's various parts move from one position to another to carry out their functions. Growth is an increase in body size that results from an increase in the size of existing cells, an increase in the number of cells, or both. In addition, a tissue sometimes increases in size because the amount of material between cells increases. In a growing bone, for example, mineral deposits accumulate between bone cells, causing the bone to grow in length and width. Differentiation in the development of a cell from an unspecialized to a specialized state. As you will see later in the text, each type of cell in the body has a specialized structure and function that differs from that of its precursor, or ancestor cell. For example, red blood cells and several types of white blood cells all arise from the same unspecialized precursor cells in the red bone marrow. Such precursor cells, which can divide and give rise to cells that undergo differentiation, are known as stem cells. Also, through differentiation, a fertilized egg, an ovum, develops into an embryo, and then into a fetus, an infant, a child, and finally an adult. Reproduction. Reproduction refers either to the formation of new cells for tissue growth, repair, or replacement, or to the production of a new individual. In humans, the former process occurs continuously throughout life, which continues from one generation to the next through the later process. The latter process. Again, in humans, the former process occurs. I'm going to just do that whole chapter again, that whole little section. Number 6, reproduction. Reproduction refers to the formation of new cells for tissue growth, repair, or replacement, or to the production of a new individual. In humans, the former process occurs continuously through life, which continues from one generation to the next through the latter process, the fertilization of an ovum by a sperm cell. When the life processes cease to occur properly, the result is death of cells and tissues, which may lead to death of the organism. Clinically, loss of the heartbeat, absence of spontaneous breathing, and loss of brain functions indicates death in the human body. The clinical connection, the autopsy. An autopsy. Autopsy equals seeing with one's own eyes. In a post-mortem after-death examination of the body and dissection of its internal organs to confirm or determine the cause of death, an autopsy can uncover the existence of disease not detected during life, determine the extent of injuries, and explain how those injuries may have contributed to the person's death. It also may provide more information about a disease, assist in the accumulation of statistical data, and educate healthcare professionals. Moreover, an autopsy can reveal conditions that may affect offspring or siblings, such as congenital heart defects. Sometimes an autopsy is legally required, such as during a criminal investigation. It may also be useful in resolving disputes between beneficiaries and insurance companies about the cause of death. At this point, we're at a checkpoint in the book, which is a review, because this is a textbook. There are objectives set up at the beginning of each chapter, and there are test questions. I don't think I'm going to get into the test questions. I'm going to try to keep it so that you can listen to this continuously. Maybe if you have the class, if you want to learn this material, you can read your book. You can look for various forms of media to back up what you've already read. And you can listen to audiobooks. And that way you have several different ways to digest the material and commit it to memory. Even though this is video, and I could show you the pictures, I'm not going to. Just to keep it uncomplicated. I want to try to make this an experience where you could take this with you in your car. I'll have headphones on. In fact, in some situations, I might not provide video at all. It may be strictly audio. So, in that interest, as I mentioned, I'm going to stay away from the charts and presentations, which are actually very good in this book. But I am going to read to you about the various systems that are listed in the body. The 11 systems of the human body and their components. The endocrine system, which we'll cover in Chapter 18, consists of the components which are hormone-producing glands, the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thymus, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, adrenal glands, pancreas, ovaries and testes, and hormone-producing cells and several other organs. Functions. It regulates the body's activities by releasing hormones, which are chemical messengers transported in the blood from an endocrine gland or tissue to a target organ. Cardiovascular system, which will be covered in chapters 19 and 21, consists of the following components: blood, heart, and blood vessels. The functions. The heart pumps blood through blood vessels. Blood carries oxygen and nutrients to cells and carbon dioxide and wastes away from cells and helps regulate acid-base balance, temperature, and water content of the body. To repeat, the heart pumps blood through blood vessels. Blood carries oxygen and nutrients to cells and carbon dioxide and wastes away from cells and helps regulate acid-base balance, temperature, and water content of body fluids. Blood components help defend against disease and repair damaged blood vessels. The digestive system. The components are organs of the gastrointestinal tract, a long tube that includes the mouth, pharynx, which is the throat, the esophagus, the stomach, small and large intestines, and anus, and also accessory organs that assist in digestive processes such as the salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. The functions. Achieves physical and chemical breakdown of food, absorbs nutrients, eliminates solid wastes. The urinary system. Components: kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. Functions: produces, stores, and eliminates urine, eliminates waste, and regulates volume and chemical composition of blood. Helps maintain the acid-base balance of the body fluids, maintains body's mineral balance, helps regulate production of red blood cells. The lymphatic system and immunity. Chapter 22. Components: lymphatic fluid, or lymph, and vessels. Also includes the spleen, the thymus, lymph nodes, and tonsils. Functions: returns proteins and fluid to the blood, carries lipids from gastrointestinal tract to blood, includes structures where lymphocytes that protect against disease-causing microbes mature and proliferate. The respiratory system. Components are the lungs, air passageways such as the pharynx, the throat, the larynx, the voice box, the trachea, the windpipe, and the bronchial tubes leading into and out of the lungs. Functions: transfers oxygen from inhaled air to blood and carbon dioxide from blood to exhaled air. Helps regulate the acid-base balance of the body fluids. Air flowing out of the lungs through vocal cords produces sound. Let me read that function again for the respiratory system. Feel free to edit my work. Okay, functions. Transfers oxygen from inhaled air to blood and carbon dioxide from blood to exhaled air. Helps regulate acid-base balance of body fluids. Air flowing out of lungs through vocal cords produces sound. The reproductive systems. The components are the gonads, testes in males and ovaries in females, and associated organs. Uterine tubes, uterus and vagina in females, and epididymis, ducts deferens, and penis in males. One more time. The components. Testes in male and ovaries in females, and associated organs. The uterine tubes, uterus and vagina in females, and the epididymis, ducts deferens, and penis in males. Functions. The gonads produce gametes, or sperm or oocytes, that unite to form a new organism. Gonads also release hormones that regulate reproduction and other body processes. Associated organs transport and store gametes. That is 7 of the body systems. Now, the integumentary system, which is in Chapter 5, consists of skin and structures associated with it, such as hair, nails, sweat glands, and oil glands. The functions: protects the body, helps regulate body temperature, eliminates some wastes, helps make vitamin D, and detects sensations such as touch, pain, warmth, and cold. The skeletal system. Components: bones and joints of the body and their associated cartilages. Functions: support and protect the body, provide a surface area for muscle attachments, aids body movement, houses cells that produce blood cells, stores minerals and lipids. The muscular system, which will be discussed in chapters 10 and 11. The components are muscles composed of skeletal muscle tissue, so named because it's usually attached to the bone. Functions: produces body movement such as walking, stabilizes body position, posture, generates heat. The nervous system. Components are the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and special sense organs such as eyes and ears. Functions: generates action potential, which are nerve impulses, to regulate body activities. It detects changes in the body's internal and external environment, interprets the changes, and responds by causing muscular contractions or glandular secretions. Okay, that covers the body systems. Now we move on to homeostasis. Define homeostasis. Describe the components of a feedback system. Contrast the operation of negative and positive feedback systems. Explain how homeostatic imbalances are related to disorders. Homeostasis is the condition of equilibrium in the body's internal environment due to the constant interaction of the body's many regulatory processes. Homeostasis is a dynamic condition. In response to changing conditions, the body's equilibrium can shift among points in a narrow range that is compatible with maintaining life. For example, the level of glucose in the blood stays between 70 and 110 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood. Each structure from the cellular level to the systemic level contributes in some ways to keep the internal environment of the body within normal limits. Homeostasis in body fluids. An important aspect of homeostasis is maintaining the volume and composition of body fluids. Dilute watery solutions containing dissolved chemicals that are found inside cells as well as surrounding them. The fluid within cells is intracellular fluid. The fluid outside body cells is extracellular fluid. Now, intracellular fluid is abbreviated ICF, and extracellular fluid is abbreviated ECF. The ECF that fills the narrow spaces between cells or tissue is known as interstitial fluid. As you progress with your studies, you will learn that ECF differs. As you progress with your studies, you will learn that ECF differs depending on where it occurs in the body. ECF within blood vessels is termed blood plasma. Within lymphatic vessels, it's called lymph. In and around the brain and spinal cord, it is known as cerebrospinal fluid. In joints, it is referred to as synovial fluid, and the ECF of eyes is called aqueous humor and vitreous body. The proper functioning of body cells depends on precise regulation of the composition of the interstitial fluid surrounding them. Because of this, interstitial fluid is often called the body's internal environment. The composition of interstitial fluid changes as substances move back and forth between it and blood plasma. Such changes of material occur across the thin walls of the smallest blood vessels in the body, the blood capillaries. This movement in both directions across capillary walls provides needed materials such as glucose, oxygen, ions, and so on to tissue cells. Let me repeat that. This movement in both directions across capillary walls provides needed materials such as glucose, oxygen, ions, and so on to tissue cells. It also removes wastes such as carbon dioxide from interstitial fluid. Control of homeostasis. Homeostasis in the human body is continually being disturbed. Some disruptions come from external environments in the form of physical insults, such as the intense heat of a Texas summer or a lack of enough oxygen from that 2-mile run. Other disruptions originate in the internal environment, such as blood glucose levels that falls too low when you skip breakfast. Homeostatic imbalance may also occur due to physiological stresses in our social environment that demand of work and school, for example. In most cases, the disruption of homeostasis is mild and temporary, and the responses of body cells quickly restore balance in the internal environment. However, in some cases, the disruption of homeostasis may be intense and prolonged, as in poisoning, overexposure to temperature extremes, severe infection, or major surgery. Fortunately, the body has many regulating systems that can usually bring the internal environment back into balance. Most often, the nervous system and the endocrine system, working together or independently, provide the needed corrective measures. The nervous system regulates homeostasis by sending electrical signals known as nerve impulses or action potentials to organs that can counteract changes from the balanced state. The endocrine system includes many glands that secrete messenger molecules called hormones into the blood. Nerve impulses typically cause rapid changes, but hormones usually work more slowly. Both means of regulation, however, work towards the same end, usually through negative feedback systems. The feedback systems. The body can regulate its internal environment through many feedback systems. A feedback system or feedback loop is a cycle of events in which the status of the body condition is monitored, evaluated, changed, remonitored, reevaluated, and so on. Each monitored variable, such as body temperature, blood pressure, or blood glucose level, is termed a controlled condition. Any disruption that changes a controlled condition is called a stimulus. A feedback system includes 3 basic components: a receptor, a control center, and an effector. A receptor is a body structure that monitors changes in a controlled condition and sends input to a control center. Typically, the input is in the form of nerve impulses or chemical signals. For example, certain nerve endings in the skin sense temperature and can detect changes, such as a dramatic drop in temperature. A control center in the body, for example, the brain, sets the range of values within which a controlled condition should be maintained. evaluates the input it receives from receptors, and generates output commands when they are needed. Output from the control center typically occurs as nerve impulses or hormones or other chemical signals. In our skin temperature example, the brain acts as the control center, receiving nerve impulses from the skin receptors and generating nerve impulses as an output. An effector is a body structure that receives output from the control center and produces a response or either that changes the controlled condition. Let me repeat. An effector is a body structure that receives output from the control center and produces a response or effect that changes the controlled condition. Nearly every organ or tissue in the body can behave as an effector. When your body temperature drops sharply, your brain, control center, sends nerve impulses, output, to your skeletal muscles, effectors. The result is shivering, which generates heat and raises your body temperature. A group of receptors and effectors communicating with their control center forms a feedback system that can regulate a controlled condition in the body's internal environment. In a feedback system, the response of the system feeds back information to change the controlled condition in some way, either negating it, negative feedback, or enhancing it, positive feedback. The operation of a feedback system. Some stimulus disrupts homeostasis by increasing or decreasing a controlled condition that is monitored by a receptor that sends input, nerve impulses or chemical signals to a control center that receives the input and provides output, nerve impulses or chemical signals to effectors that bring about a change or response that alters the controlled condition. There is a return to homeostasis when the response brings the controlled condition back to normal. Negative feedback systems. A negative feedback system reverses a change in a controlled condition. Consider the regulation of blood pressure. Blood pressure, or BP, is force exerted by blood as it presses against the walls of blood vessels. Once again, blood pressure is the force exerted by blood as it presses against the walls of blood vessels. When the heart beats faster or harder, blood pressure increases. If some internal or external stimulus causes blood pressure, controlled condition, to rise, the following sequence of events occurs. Baroreceptors, the receptor. Pressure-sensitive nerve cells located in the walls of certain blood vessels detect the higher pressure. The baroreceptor sends nerve impulses, input, to the brain, which is the control center, which interprets the impulses and responds by sending nerve impulses, or output, to the heart and blood vessels, the effectors. The heart rate decreases and blood vessels dilate or widen, which causes blood pressure to decrease. That is the response. So once again, the heart rate decreases and blood vessels dilate, they widen, which causes blood pressure to decrease. That is the response. The sequence of events quickly returns the controlled condition, blood pressure, to normal and homeostasis is restored. Notice that the activity of the effector causes blood pressure to drop, a result that negates the original stimulus, an increase in blood pressure. This is why it's called a negative feedback system. Positive feedback system. A positive feedback system tends to strengthen or reinforce a change in one of the body's controlled conditions. A positive feedback system operates similarly to a negative feedback system, except for the way the response affects the controlled condition. The control center still provides commands to an effector, but this time the effector produces a physiological response that adds to or reinforces the initial change in the controlled condition. The action of a positive feedback system continues until it is interrupted by some mechanism. Normal childbirth provides a good example of a positive feedback system. The system contradictions, that was incorrect, excuse me. Normal childbirth provides a good example of a positive feedback system. The first contractions of labor, stimulus, push part of the fetus into the cervix, the lowest part of the uterus, which opens into the vagina. Stretch-sensitive nerves, or receptors, monitor the amount of stretching of the cervix, the controlled condition. As stretching increases, they send more nerve impulses to the brain, the control center, which in turn releases the hormone oxytocin, the output into the blood. Oxytocin causes muscles in the walls of the uterus, the effector, to contract even more forcefully. The contractions push the fetus farther down the uterus, which stretches the cervix even more. The cycle of stretching, hormone release, and even stronger contractions is interpreted only by the birth of the baby. Again, the cycle of stretching, hormone release, and even stronger contractions is interrupted only by the birth of the baby. Then stretching of the cervix ceases and oxytocin is no longer released. Another example of positive feedback is what happens to your body when you lose a great deal of blood. Under normal conditions, the heart pumps blood under sufficient pressure to body cells to provide them with oxygen and nutrients to maintain homeostasis. Upon severe blood loss, blood pressure drops. Homeostasis, regulation of blood pressure by negative feedback system. Note that the response is fed back into the system, and the system continues to lower blood pressure until there is a return to normal blood pressure, or homeostasis. Some stimulus disrupts homeostasis by increasing blood pressure. The baroreceptors in certain blood vessels send input on nerve impulses to the control center, which is the brain. The brain interprets input and sends output on nerve impulses to the effector, the heart, and the blood vessels. A decrease in heart rate decreases blood pressure. Return to homeostasis when response brings blood pressure back to normal. Positive feedback control of labor, contractions during birth of a baby. If the response enhances or intensifies the stimulus, a system is operating by positive feedback. If the response enhances or intensifies the stimulus, a system is operating by positive feedback. Contractions of wall of uterus force baby's head or body into the cervix, thus increasing the stretching of the cervix. The receptors, which are stretch-sensitive nerve cells in the cervix, send input nerve impulses to the control center, which is the brain. The brain interprets input and releases or outputs oxytocin. The effectors, the muscles in the walls of the uterus, contract more forcefully. The baby's body stretches the cervix more. Interruption of cycle. Birth of baby decreases stretching of the cervix, thus breaking the positive feedback cycle. Positive feedback, increased stretching of cervix, causes release of more oxytocin, which results in more stretching of the cervix. Now, to continue the positive feedback system, another example of positive feedback is what happens to your body when you lose a great deal of blood. We've discussed this earlier. Under normal conditions, The heart pumps blood under sufficient pressure to body cells to provide them with oxygen and nutrients to maintain homeostasis. Upon severe blood loss, blood pressure drops and blood cells, including heart cells, receive less oxygen and function less efficiently. If the blood loss continues, heart cells become weaker. The pumping action of the heart decreases further. The blood pressure continues to fall. This is an example of positive feedback cycle that has a serious consequence and may even lead to death if there is no medical intervention. As you'll see in Chapter 19, blood clotting is also an example of a positive feedback system. These examples suggest some important differences between positive and negative feedback systems. Because a positive feedback system continually reinforces a change in a controlled condition, some event outside the system must shut it off. If the action of a positive feedback is not stopped, it can run away and may even produce life-threatening conditions in the body. The action of a negative feedback system, by contrast, slows and then stops as the controlled condition returns to its normal state. Usually positive feedback systems reinforce conditions that do not happen very often, and negative feedback systems regulate conditions in the body that remain fairly stable over long periods. Homeostatic imbalances. As long as all the body's controlled conditions remain within certain narrow limits, body cells function efficiently. Negative feedback systems maintain homeostasis and the body stays healthy. Should one or more components of the body lose their ability to contribute to homeostasis, however, the normal equilibrium among body processes may be disturbed. If the homeostatic imbalance is moderate, a disorder or disease may occur. If it is severe, death may result. A disorder is any abnormality of structure or function. Disease is a more specific term for an illness characterized by a recognizable set of signs and symptoms. A local disease affects one part of a limited region of the body. A systemic disease affects either the entire body or several parts of it. Diseases alter body structures and functions in characteristic ways. A person with a disease may experience symptoms, subjective changes in body functions that are not apparent to an observer. Examples of symptoms are headache, nausea, anxiety. Objective changes that a clinician can observe and measure are called signs. Signs of disease can be either anatomical, such as swelling or a rash, or physiological, such as fever, high blood pressure, or paralysis. The science that deals with why, when, and where disease occurs and how they are transmitted among individuals in a community is known as epidemiology. Pharmacology is the science that deals with the effects and uses of drugs in the treatment of disease. Diagnosis, the clinical connection. Diagnosis is the science and skill of distinguishing one disorder or disease from another. The patient's symptoms and signs, his or her medical history, a physical exam, and laboratory test provide the basis for making a diagnosis. Taking a medical history consists of collecting information about the events that might be related to a patient's illness. These include the chief complaint, primary reason for seeking medical attention, history of present illness, past medical problems, family medical problems, social history, and a review of symptoms. A physical examination is an orderly evaluation of the body and its functions. This process includes the non-invasive techniques of inspection, palpation, auscultation. This is the one I had a problem with earlier. Auscultation and percussion. Let me do that one again. A physical examination is an orderly evaluation of the body and its functions. This process includes non-invasive techniques of inspection, palpation, auscultation, and percussion that you learned about earlier in the chapter. Along with measurement of vital signs, temperature, pulse, respiratory rate, and blood pressure, and sometimes laboratory tests. Basic anatomical terminology will be the next part of Chapter 1. I'm going to try to label everything in the description so that you can find it easily, and I'm going to try to go through the book from cover to cover. So obviously that's a huge order. We're almost up to an hour now, 50 minutes. So if some of you out there, if anybody out there has an interest in anatomy and would like to be a guest reader, give me a call. And we'll see how that works out. Try to get some help with this. But we will continue with basic anatomical terminology in the next chapter.